She said, "You keep coming too close." I replied, "Because I can't stay away from you." "You keep coming too close." I froze mid-step, my fingers hovering over the stack of folders I was supposed to deliver. Her voice, low, amused, and just shy of a scold, wrapped around me like a velvet thread, pulling tighter than it should have. I swallowed, and all I could do was look at her. She stood by the window, sunlight catching the subtle highlights in her hair, the kind of soft glow that made the corners of her eyes crinkle ever so slightly when she smiled. And yes, she was smiling, though her lips were pressed together, careful. "I can't stay away," I said, and my own voice sounded foreign, too loud in the quiet room. She raised an eyebrow, tilting her head just a fraction. "Because?" I didn't answer immediately. There was no need. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, a mix of sandalwood and something soft I couldn't name. Her presence filled the air, and the folders in my hands suddenly felt weightless, almost absurd. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, like a quiet hearth that invited but warned at the same time. Her hand brushed mine as she reached past me to straighten a stack of papers on the desk. The contact was brief, barely enough to notice, and yet it set my skin on fire. I tried to focus on the mundane: folders, pens, a coffee cup half forgotten on the edge of the table. But my eyes kept returning to her. The curve of her jaw, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the subtle tilt of her shoulders when she tried not to seem aware that I was staring. "You always notice things," she said softly, almost a whisper. Her gaze caught mine, and in it, I saw something like curiosity mixed with caution, and maybe just a hint of longing. My stomach knotted in a way I hadn't expected. "I notice everything," I admitted, trying to keep my tone steady. "It's hard not to." She laughed then, short, a little sharp, but not unkind. And suddenly, the room felt smaller, the silence heavier. There was something in the way she moved toward the window again, lingering as if she were considering crossing an invisible line. The afternoon light softened her profile, and I caught a subtle tremor in her fingers as she rested them on the sill. I stepped closer, almost without thinking, drawn like a moth to heat. Her eyes flicked up, and for a moment, she didn't pull away. Just watched me. The air between us thickened, unspoken words hanging like dust motes in sunlight. My pulse thrummed in my ears, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. "You're reckless," she said finally. "And I don't know if I should let you." Her honesty hit me in a way that made me want to lean in and close the space entirely. But instead, I just nodded, smiling faintly, because the truth was, I couldn't stop myself. "I won't hurt you," I whispered, more to convince myself than her. Her lips parted slightly, a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, and the silence stretched between us. I wanted to bridge it, to reach out, to touch her again, but the world, that small, perfectly ordinary office, had other ideas. The sudden squeak of the door made us both flinch. She glanced toward it sharply, her expression changing in a heartbeat from playful vulnerability to guarded alertness. And for a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. I stayed still, watching her. The heat between us lingered, unspoken, unresolved, dangerous in the most exquisite way. The door clicked shut behind us, but the silence didn't ease. If anything, it pressed tighter, like the walls themselves were eavesdropping. I moved toward the counter to make coffee, partly to give her space, partly to keep myself from leaning across the small gap between us again. "You drink black?" she asked, her voice low, almost casual, but her shoulder brushed mine when she reached for a mug. The contact was brief, fleeting, but enough to send a ripple through me. I couldn't control. I nodded, words failing me, and she let out a tiny, knowing laugh. I'd seen her like this before, poised, graceful, confident, but moments like these revealed something more fragile, something she tried to tuck neatly behind polite smiles and steady hands. And I felt it immediately. The distance she kept was less about disinterest and more about caution. Past hurts, perhaps, or memories she wasn't ready to voice. I wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I watched her fingers wrap around the mug, her knuckles pale, her thumb tracing the rim almost unconsciously. A line on her hand, faint but visible, caught my eye. A scar, a memory etched into skin. She noticed me looking and quickly shifted her hand away. I didn't press. Some things weren't meant to be named, at least not yet. I didn't think anyone my age. I started, then stopped. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. She gave me a sidelong glance, a little smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, as if she understood the sentence I couldn't finish. Would you notice? She offered softly. Or care? Both? I admitted, voice quieter than I intended. The air between us thickened again. I wanted to reach out, wanted to touch her shoulder just once more, but I hesitated. The age difference, 10, 12 years, loomed in my mind. The way people might judge, the way our own fears whispered caution. And yet, here she was, lingering closer than propriety might allow, breath sometimes brushing mine when she leaned in to point at a document or adjust the papers on my desk. She turned, and her eyes caught mine for a fraction longer than necessary. I could see the hesitation there, the pull towards something forbidden, tempered by years of experience and a careful, guarded heart. And still, she didn't step back entirely. Her hand brushed my arm, a slow, deliberate graze that left a warmth lingering where skin had met skin. I felt the weight of it, the unspoken invitation folded into the motion, and I resisted the urge to lean in, even as the world seemed to shrink around us. I'm glad you came today, she said quietly, almost to herself. Her gaze flicked down to the counter, and then back to me, as if weighing the risk of admitting more. Me too, I replied, letting the words hang between us, unfinished but heavy with meaning. For a long moment, we just stood there, the hum of the coffee machine the only sound. Her hand lingered near mine on the counter, our fingers almost brushing, and in that small, suspended space, I felt something solidify, a bond that didn't need words yet, a connection built from glances, touches, and the fragile, thrilling knowledge that we were both teetering on the edge of something we weren't supposed to. And in that silence, with her presence so achingly close, I realized I didn't want to step back. I was stacking papers on her desk when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from a friend, mundane but somehow intrusive. I tried to ignore it, telling myself the vibration was nothing, but the sound broke the fragile bubble of the room. She glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly, lips pressed together, and I felt the heat of her gaze like a warning. Is someone messaging you? She asked softly. I shook my head, fumbling to silence the phone. No, just nothing. Her hand lingered near mine on the edge of the desk, her fingers twitching as if to reach for something she shouldn't. I wanted to take it, to hold it, to close the last inch of distance between us, but I hesitated. The air felt electric, thick with unsaid words and shared breaths. You shouldn't. I mean, this. Us. It's complicated, she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied the curve of her neck, the subtle shift of her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume drifting closer with every heartbeat. She turned slightly, and our faces were near enough that I could feel her breath. Against my cheek, a whisper of warmth that made my pulse jump. I know, I said finally, my voice low, but it doesn't stop me from noticing. Her eyes flicked to mine, a flash of vulnerability and defiance colliding in that brief moment. I leaned just a fraction closer, enough to feel the warmth of her body, the softness of her hair brushing my hand as I adjusted a pin she'd dropped. And then, almost instinctively, she stepped back. A subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but it left a hollow ache where her presence had been pressing against me. We can't, she said, her lips barely moving. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her, and I knew she wanted to step closer just as much as I did. The sudden squeak of the office door startled us both. I spun slightly, but it was just a cleaning crew member checking in. My chest tightened with the rush of almost being caught, the heat in my cheeks matching the tension in the room. She exhaled softly, a sound that was part relief, part regret, and I felt the magnetic pull again, stronger than before. When the door clicked shut, we both exhaled, but neither of us moved away. Our shoulders brushed, our hands hovered near each other, trembling slightly, neither daring to cross the line but both aware of it. You're impossible, she whispered, voice rough with something unspoken, a blend of longing and warning. I can't help it, I murmured, leaning just enough that my forehead almost touched hers. Her eyes fluttered closed, a shiver running through her, and I froze. The moment stretched, fragile and electric, teetering on the edge of a kiss that neither of us gave but both imagined. When she finally opened her eyes, they were softer, warmer, and despite her attempt to pull away, her hand found mine, fingers brushing just long enough to anchor us together, closer than ever. And in that suspended heartbeat, I realized the resistance wasn't enough. Not yet, but it was only a matter of time. I couldn't breathe. Not properly. Not with her so close, the heat from her body pressing against mine as she reached for a stack of papers I didn't need. My hand brushed against hers, deliberately this time, lingering longer than accidental, and I felt her fingers tremble. "You're impossible," she whispered again, her voice trembling with something she wouldn't name. Frustration? Desire? Fear? I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to. "I can't stop," I murmured, voice low, rough, barely audible. I reached up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She leaned into the touch just slightly, and the warmth of her skin against my fingers stole my control. Her eyes searched mine, wide and luminous, and I saw the struggle there. The years of caution, the careful walls she'd built, clashing with the pull she couldn't deny. My heart thudded painfully, the rhythm matching the silent drumbeat of her own hesitation. "I shouldn't," she started, but the words faltered. She pressed her hand against my chest lightly, almost a barrier, almost an invitation. "People, they'd never understand." "I don't care what anyone thinks," I said, voice shaking with the honesty I hadn't let myself say before. I leaned closer, so close that the warmth of her breath brushed my lips, and I felt her heartbeat under my hand, rapid and uneven. She flinched at first, and then, impossibly, leaned in slightly, the smallest fraction, just enough to send a shiver through both of us. I wanted to close the distance entirely, to capture the moment before fear or judgment could claim it back. "I've never," she started again, a crack in her composure that made my chest tighten. "I know," I interrupted softly, my lips near her ear. "Me neither, until you." Her breath caught. The tremor in her shoulders betrayed her attempt at control, and I wanted nothing more than to erase the space between us. Her hand, warm and tentative, slipped into mine as if seeking an anchor. We stood like that, suspended, the world outside forgotten. The room smaller than ever. Every sound, the hum of the lights, the distant traffic, faded into nothing. Every glance, every brush of skin, every pause carried weight I couldn't name but felt in my bones. "I can't. I shouldn't," she whispered again, the words dissolving into the tension that wrapped around us like a storm. "I can't either," I admitted, voice low, ragged. "But I don't want to stop." Her eyes closed for a moment, a shiver running through her, and I leaned closer, forehead almost touching hers, breath mingling. My hand cupped her cheek, gentle, reverent, and the world fell away. And then, a sudden knock at the door made us both start. My heart lurched. The spell broke, the fragile thread of courage we'd built snapping just enough to leave us hanging, suspended, aching. Her eyes opened, wide, searching mine. Mine locked on hers. And in that gaze, in that breathless second, I knew the line was just in front of us. One step, one motion, and it would vanish forever. The knock at the door wasn't from the cleaning crew. My heart slammed in my chest as I turned, catching her in a fleeting glance. Her hand lingered near mine, brushing the side of my hip as if she hadn't moved, but the tension in her shoulders told a different story. Fear, anticipation, the thrill of risk. A soft voice called from the doorway. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," said her assistant, eyes wide as they landed on us. But something in their gaze lingered longer than polite courtesy required, a subtle flicker that made my stomach drop. I stepped back instinctively, and she did the same, though barely, so close that the shift of her weight still pressed her against me. Her hand hovered near mine before retracting slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. The safe rhythm we'd been keeping, the small world we'd built between us, suddenly felt exposed, fragile. I thought you were alone," she stammered, voice low, almost lost in the hum of the fluorescent lights. Her eyes found mine again, wide, raw, and vulnerable. A shiver ran through me, and I realized she was holding herself together only by the thinnest thread. The assistant left with a polite, lingering glance, but the spell of that interruption didn't break entirely. Something about the presence of a third person, even briefly, made everything feel dangerous. Risky. Undeniable. She exhaled shakily, leaning into me, almost accidentally, and I felt the warmth of her body press against mine in a way that made it impossible to ignore what I wanted. My hands twitched, itching to reach for her, to anchor her to me, but I held back, partly because of caution, partly because of the electricity that crackled in the space we shared. "I didn't tell you, because I wasn't sure," she said suddenly, voice tight, eyes avoiding mine. I've noticed you, far longer than you think. And maybe I wanted to see if you'd notice me too." Her confession hit me like fire. The words themselves were enough, but the way her body leaned into mine, fingers brushing against my arm when she shifted slightly, made the air between us almost unbearable. I swallowed, hand hovering in midair as if the simple act of touching her would unravel everything. "I've been thinking about you every day," I admitted, voice rough. My hand itched to tuck a stray hair behind her ear, to tilt her face toward mine, but instead I only let my gaze drink her in, memorizing the curve of her lips, the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the tremor in her fingers. She stepped back slightly, though the gap was barely a breath, just enough to remind me of the rules we were bending. The danger only made the pull stronger, forbidden, risky, irresistible. "And now," I whispered, inching closer despite the line we hadn't crossed. "Do we stop?" Her eyes softened, trembling with unspoken admission, and she didn't answer immediately. Instead, her hand found mine again, fingers curling lightly around mine, holding tight even as the world seemed ready to pull us apart. The choice hung there, suspended between us, fragile and electric. One step forward, and the moment would belong to us completely. One step back, and everything could vanish. And in that heartbeat, neither of us moved, yet both of us knew what was coming. We stood in the quiet of the office, the hum of fluorescent lights louder than it should have been. Every breath she took seemed to match mine, shallow, rapid, the invisible thread between us tightening until it felt like it could snap. My hand hovered near hers, trembling with the weight of what could, and would, happen if I closed the distance. "I can't," she whispered, voice low, almost trembling. "I've never done this, not like this." "I know," I said, barely more than a breath. My thumb brushed the back of her hand, tentative, savoring the warmth that had been out of reach for too long. "Neither have I, but I can't step back anymore." Her eyes searched mine, a storm of hesitation and longing colliding in their depths. Every small movement, the tilt of her head, the way she leaned slightly into me despite her words, the subtle tremor in her fingers, spoke louder than any confession. I could feel her heartbeat against my palm, a rapid, uneven drum that mirrored my own. "I'm afraid," she admitted, voice breaking softly. "Of everything. People, judgment, even myself." "I don't care," I said, voice ragged. I leaned closer, just enough that the warmth of her breath brushed my lips, sending a shiver down my spine. "I care about you. Only you." Her gaze softened, a fragile surrender flickering there, and she let out a shaky laugh, part relief, part disbelief. "You're impossible," she murmured, though the tension in her shoulders had eased ever so slightly. I cupped her cheek gently, feeling the smoothness of her skin, the subtle pulse beneath my fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, the tiniest fraction, enough that the world seemed to vanish, leaving only the heat and tension between us. "I've been waiting for this," I whispered. "For you." Her lips parted, a quiet inhale, and her hand slid into mine fully, fingers entwining. The connection was electric, grounding, terrifying, exhilarating. Every hesitation, every fear, every glance we'd stolen over weeks and months coalesced into this one suspended moment. "I can't believe we're here," she breathed, pressing her forehead lightly against mine. Her hair brushed my lips, and I swallowed against the ache of longing that had been building far too long. "I can't," I replied, voice low, "because I've wanted this from the first moment I saw you." And then we moved closer, in a rhythm neither of us needed to speak. The air around us thickened, every small touch, a hand on the waist, a thumb brushing a knuckle, the ghost of a kiss hovering just out of reach, carrying the weight of all we'd held back. No words could capture it. No hesitation could stop it. Finally, in a breathless pause, she looked up at me, eyes full of clarity and warmth, and whispered, Then, let's not wait anymore. I smiled, answering not with words, but with the gentle press of my hand against hers, the slight brush of my lips against her hair. And in that small, messy, human moment, it was clear we understood each other fully, and nothing, not time, fear, or judgment, could undo it. The office had emptied long ago, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the golden wash of sunset spilling across the floor. We sat side by side on the couch she'd claimed years ago as practical but comfortable, our shoulders brushing, hands intertwined without a word. The tension that had haunted us for weeks had dissolved into something warm and steady, a quiet certainty that made my chest feel full in a way I hadn't known was possible. She leaned her head on my shoulder, hair brushing my neck, and I felt the softness of her exhale against me. I draped my arm around her, holding her gently, as if keep her close could somehow ward off the years, the doubts, the whispers of judgment. I never thought, she murmured, voice muffled against my shirt. I never thought I'd let someone in like this. You don't have to think about it anymore, I said softly, tilting my head so my lips grazed the top of her hair. You're here, with me. Her fingers tightened around mine, small but insistent, and I could feel the pulse in her wrist. She shifted slightly, resting fully against me, and for the first time since our first meeting, it felt as though the world outside had no claim on us. The age gap, the risks, the what-ifs, none of it mattered. Not here, not now. I've been so careful for so long, she admitted, voice quiet, a tremor in it that made my chest ache. I wasn't sure I could trust me. You can? I whispered, brushing my thumb along her knuckles. And you did. You trusted me. That's all I need. Her lips curved into a soft smile, one that reached her eyes and softened the lines life had written there. I leaned in, gently pressing my forehead to hers, and she mirrored the gesture, our breaths mingling, our closeness a quiet conversation of its own. We stayed like that for minutes that felt like hours, no rush, no expectation, just the weight and warmth of each other. The air was thick with the promise of tomorrow, the echo of what had almost been lost, and the gentle thrill of what we had finally claimed. I like this, she whispered, voice playful but tender, her hand brushing lightly over mine. Being here like this. Me too, I said, smiling. More than I can say. There was a long pause, just us, our hands still intertwined, the evening light casting soft shadows across her face. It felt perfect in its imperfection, human, messy, beautiful. And in that moment, I knew that no one else's judgment, no whisper of doubt, could touch what we had. Finally, I leaned closer, capturing her hand in both of mine, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture. Simple, but full of promise. She laughed softly, the sound warm and unrestrained, and rested her head against me once more. We didn't need more words. The quiet spoke for both of us, clear and unwavering. We were together, at last, fully present, fully seen, fully ours. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room in soft gold, I whispered, I'm not going anywhere. Her fingers tightened around mine. Good, she replied, voice soft and sure. Neither am I. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?